Hello, my beautiful kitties. Come in, come in. And how has your week been? I'm just typing more of your creepy stories for my files. So what's new with me? Well, I did go on a date last night, actually. Yes, the problem was it was like talking to the invisible man. He had zero personality, not a squat. I'm not kidding. You know the worst part about taking a corpse on a date? They're quiet. They always give you the cold shoulder and always seem pretty stiff when it comes to paying the bill. Needless to say, I won't be calling him anytime soon. I've had some wonderfully weird stories sent to me this week, starting off with this first one from 17-year-old Brandon and his spooky encounter one evening.
I was 17 and living with my parents in our family home in Columbus, Ohio. Things were pretty normal up until this point. I used to get really bad insomnia as a teenager, so I was always awake in the middle of the night. One night when I was laying there on my bed trying to sleep, I started to hear the sound of two people fighting. It sounded like a man and a woman. I could also hear crying. I looked outside my window, but I couldn't see anyone on the street or outside the house. Besides, it sounded more like it was coming from inside the house. I couldn't figure out what the argument was about or what exactly they were saying, but I could hear two people raising their voices at each other in anger. I remember thinking that it didn't sound like my parents, so I couldn't work out who was making this noise. I went out into the hallway and checked in my parents' bedroom. They were both there, sound asleep in their bed. There were no TVs on in the house, no radio and no phones, nothing. It was completely silent. This started to become a regular occurrence. Almost every night between 2 and 4 a.m., I would hear this fighting and crying. I eventually asked my parents if they had heard anything. They said no, but they did say they occasionally heard footsteps walking around upstairs when we were all downstairs. It was the month of October 2017. It was a Friday night. I was in my bathroom getting ready to go out to the mall with my friends. It was autumn, so even though it was only 6:30 p.m., it was pitch black outside. So I was in the bathroom fixing my hair with the bathroom door ever so slightly cracked. I remember feeling a sensation that someone was next to me and was staring at me. I was the only one home at the time. The hallway was completely dark. Out of reflex, I turned my head to look out the crack in the door. When I did that, I saw a woman. The woman was probably in her 30s, white skin that was red from what appeared to be crying, black mascara running down her face from her eyes, messy, wavy blonde hair, looked to be from the late 80s or early 90s by the looks of her clothing and hairstyle. My house was built in 1987. She looked beyond terrified and helpless. I could see her as if she was an alive human being. She was solid and full colour despite being in a completely dark hallway. I also noticed she was really thin. I was terrified. I must have been looking at her for a few seconds, and she seemed to vanish before my eyes. 1 minute she was there, the next, nothing but the dark hallway. I shut the door immediately, and when I eventually left the bathroom, I couldn't see her anywhere. After that night, the woman would make 2 more appearances in my bedroom. She would appear at the foot of my bed in the middle of the night, looking the way I first saw her. Tear-stained cheeks, a terrified look in her eyes, mascara running down her face. One night she looked at me and said, "Don't do it," before disappearing. After that, I never saw her or heard any more screaming, crying or fighting. Nothing. At first it made me feel petrified, knowing I had seen this woman in my house, in my bedroom, heard her crying and fighting with someone. I was also scared I was going insane and hallucinating. Would anyone believe me? Then my fear transformed into curiosity, and I actually worried for this poor soul. I was wondering, why me? Why am I the only person who can see and hear this woman? What does she want? How can I help her? I've tried looking up domestic violence cases with my address and nearby addresses from the 80s until I moved into that house in 2010. I couldn't find anything. However, I do think that this was a premonition or a warning. At the time, I was dating a guy who turned out to be extremely abusive and would hurt me to the point where he almost took my life. The words she told me, "Don't do it," sent chills down my spine. It was like she knew what was going to happen to me after I decided to date and move in with that guy. Looking back, I now realize that was my first experience being able to fully hear, see, and sort of communicate with spirits. The following year, in 2018, I was working at a retail store overnight, and I could see people of all ages and backgrounds look extremely lost and scared. Then they would see me and their faces would light up with a look of relief, like they finally found someone, and then they would vanish right in front of me. Some would say thank you before vanishing. Looking at people who are alive, I instantly get an overload of information. I feel like I know their name, significant people and memories in their lives, and how they are truly feeling. I can do this with both living and dead people. However, I cannot prove how accurate this is because I haven't been brave enough to ask people if what I'm feeling is true, because I don't want people to think I'm crazy, you know? To this day, I'm able to do this. I don't know if it's a blessing, a curse, or a mix of both.
Hey there, it's that time of night where I'm just recounting old memories instead of falling asleep. I almost completely forgot about this one encounter I had last year and thought it would be nice to share with you. There was a day I finally had off work and decided I'd head for the beach. The closest beach is about an hour and a half away, and I decided to book it at dawn to try and get there on time to see the sunrise on my own. Just for a bit of background, I wasn't in a very good mindset back then. I always truly felt alone, kinda lost and hopeless in my life. I really felt like there was no purpose in living really. I'm a person that likes to run away from my problems and tries to find things to keep me distracted and constantly busy. That's why I work a lot and don't have many days off. I dreaded having a day off and being alone with my thoughts, and figured I'd just get away from where I was, even for a little bit. It was only going to be a half-day trip where I go and see the sunrise, take in my surroundings, meditate, and find some inner peace before going back to my mediocre life. I ended up getting there once the sun rose, which was a bummer, but it wasn't going to stop me from enjoying watching the waves. The location I went to is technically an island, but there's a massive bridge that you can drive over. Once you get to the island, it's basically the shape of a long strip, and it can go for miles if you drive north of it. So, I decided to drive a good 8 to 10 miles out by car where I knew there would be no people and I can be alone. Some people drive down that way more to go deep sea fishing, but while driving I didn't see any cars. Once I got to the access point on the beach, I made a really dumb move and decided to drive into the sand. I have a Kia Optima, so in no way is my car capable of driving through sand. Don't ask me why. I was kind of in a fuck it, what could go wrong moment, and within 5 feet of getting into the access point, my car got stuck. So no signal since I was way out there, no people, just me and my sunken car. Surprisingly, my mentality was just, well, what I've been through in my life has been way worse, and I felt way worse, so this isn't so bad. I calmly went and checked what I was dealing with, and yeah, car was mega stuck in the sand. I shrugged, rolled up my sleeves, and started to dig in attempts to get the tires out of the soft sand. I figured I could do that for some time before I get tired, and if it didn't work, I'd just leave my car there, go enjoy the day, and figure out things later. It was probably 7 a.m. at the time, so if I had to do an 8 to 10 mile walk, then no biggie. Probably in about 5 minutes of me just digging, I all of a sudden hear a voice behind me that scared the jeebies out of me. I turned to see an older gentleman in fishing gear with a big 4x4 Ford truck standing a few feet away asking me if everything was okay. The most distinct feature on him was that his shirt had the name embroidered on it with M. Zaniga. He was probably in his 60s, white hair. I could tell by the tips that stuck out from under his beige cap, round glasses, and a bit tanned. He looked like a normal old guy to me ready to go fishing. It was so strange though, I didn't hear his car or even notice him getting out and walking up to me, and I was the only person there. There wasn't much background noise since I wasn't remotely close to the ocean, so it would have been hard to miss him coming up. He asked me again if I was okay. I said yeah, perfectly fine for the most part. You're crazy for trying to drive this car in there. It wouldn't have made it, he told me. I kind of laughed and told him yeah, it was a pretty dumb move on my part. He started inspecting my car and told me that he can use my truck to pull me out, and I obliged. After a few minutes of tangling around some wires and maneuvering my car, my baby was out. I thanked him again for the generosity. What's your name? He asked me. I let him know, and he said it was nice to meet me. He looks around a bit, kind of peering into my car. And what are you doing out here all alone? I told him I had the day off work, and I just wanted to enjoy the day. He stares at me for a few moments, then introduces himself. My name is Mario Zuniga. Where are you from? I tell him the city I came from, and his eyes lit up. Oh, I'm from there too. I have a clinic in the city, and I'm a veterinarian. After some small talk, I mentioned where I worked, and he knew exactly what I was talking about. Oh yeah, the one off Dean Street. And he seemed to be very familiar with the city. After all, he did say he lived there. After a bit more talking, he stuck out his hand and I shook it. He clasped my hand with his other hand and held it and told me, I really hope you're doing okay. I like to look out for people and just want to see how they're doing. I'm actually going fishing, but I'm heading out a couple miles from here and will probably be out all day. And I'd love to invite you, but don't know when you'll have to leave. I told him I appreciate the offer, but it was okay. I wasn't planning on staying long. He told me that if I wanted to hang out on the beach, it's probably best if I head south instead, where I can park in an actual parking lot and just walk my way up the shore. He wished me the best and reminded me that things will be okay and went on his way. I don't know if I gave off that solemn kind of energy or he felt it, or thought I may have wanted to do something extreme while alone out there. But his last words, reminded me that things are going to be okay, really stuck with me. I ended up going to the south side and hanging out on the beach there for a couple of hours, but decided to Google him since he said he was a vet in my town. The city I live in is relatively small, and I only know 3 vet clinics in the area. I did a real extensive search of his name and looked up majority of vets that work in those clinics, and I could not find an ounce of this man anywhere. It really was as if he didn't exist, because even then I felt like he had appeared out of thin air. And on top of that, I was the only person that saw him. To this day, I felt like he was some sort of guardian angel to me, especially when he reminded me that people do care and that there are people there to look out for you. I think it was a special encounter. I'll always remember. And who knows, maybe we all have someone looking out for us.
Before I start, I'd like to give a couple of details about me. At the time of this story, I was just finishing my 6th grade year and was very athletic and took runs every day. This encounter occurred in the summer, and what comes with summer? Heat. So instead of running in the day when it was hotter, I began running in the evening when the sun was down. On the day of the encounter, I followed my normal routine. I told my mum I was going to start my run and then began to listen to my music on my iPod Shuffle. Now, the way my neighbourhood works is that there is only one entrance which doubles as the only exit as well. I live in a suburban area, so the main road that passes the entrance on my neighbourhood isn't very busy. On the day I was running down the main road of my neighbourhood that all the small streets branched off of, I was close to the entrance and I could clearly see all the cars passing by. I am also clearly visible to all cars passing by. I remember watching this grey Honda car slam on its brakes at the entrance on my neighbourhood. This was done so fast and so hard that I heard the tyres squeal over the song I was listening to at full volume. I brushed it off as someone following directions that most likely nearly missed my neighbourhood entrance. The car then began up the road I was running on, going extremely slow, at least 10 miles an hour under the speed limit. I could make out 3 shadows in the car through the darkness, and a little light from the house porch lights. 2 at the front of the car and someone in the back seat. As I passed the car, I saw the driver's side window was down. I gave the car a smile and a wave, and I turned down a small street that branched off the road I was running on. Now, I remember feeling extremely on edge, so I checked over my shoulder. I saw the car turn around in the middle of the road, and then slowly turn down the street I was running on. Again, I chalked it up to misinterpreting directions and tried not to think too much of it, but I really began to freak out. As a girl of my age, I always would jump to the worst possible outcome. I wasn't very tall, and I only stood at about 5'2" inches, so I knew that I could be easily manhandled if the people in the car had any ill intentions. But I knew that was very unlikely, so I tried to tell myself to calm down. I reached the cul-de-sac at the end of the street, so I was now running on the opposite side of the car. They were still going very slow. What I do next may have saved my life, and I can't imagine what would have happened to me if I didn't. As the car and I were about to be right next to each other, I paused my music but kept my earbuds in, giving the illusion that I was still listening. As the car and I got closer, I heard the two men speaking. One of them actually tried to speak to me, yelling "hey" or something like that, but I didn't reply because I knew that it would blow my cover and that they would know I was able to hear them. As the car drove a little bit in front of me and out of view, I heard one of them say, "We will get her when we turn around." I froze. Get me? I felt like something dumped a bucket of freezing water on my head. I knew they had to go around the cul-de-sac still, so I did the only thing I could. I sprinted. As I ran down the street, I looked over my shoulder and saw the car had already went round the cul-de-sac and was now going a lot faster after me. I turned into the main road of my neighbourhood and ran. I passed my street and just ran as fast as I could towards the end of my neighbourhood. My house was the first on my street, so I knew they would see where I lived if I tried to go home. I was scared to death and was running for my life. I had no idea what I could do to get away from these people, so I just pushed my body as fast as possible. I continued to check over my shoulder, hoping that they wouldn't be there, but they were. They were right behind me, and I distinctively remember they were silent. I had imagined them yelling at each other that I was going to get away, but they were chasing me in silence. To me, that was creepier than if they were yelling. When I ran down the last street in my neighbourhood, I started running through backyards. That was the only thing I had left to do. I heard the car slam on its brakes, turn off the engines, and 3 doors slam. My heartbeat sped up. I was convinced they were going to begin chasing me through the backyards. "Get in the car!" "We won't find her like this." My heart dropped as I heard 3 doors shut and the car engine start up again. Now that I was running through backyards, I would have to run across the streets too. This was the scariest part for me, because I would be very visible to the people in the car if they were to be driving down the main road. I remember staring at the street, trying to decide whether or not I should try to wait it out or if I should book it home. I went with book it home. I didn't even check my shoulder as I ran through backyards, jumped over fences and ran across the streets. I was just waiting for car lights to light up the area around me or for arms to wrap around me, but it never happened. Somehow, the car must have turned down the wrong streets or completely missed me, and I truly believe that is the luckiest thing that has ever happened to me. When I got to my house, I wasted no time jumping through the door. Once I slammed my door shut, I sat on the ground and thought about what had just happened and what could have happened. I never ended up telling my parents until years later or calling the police. But if they're still out there, I hope they're locked up somewhere so they can never terrorize a child again. I can't imagine what would have happened to me if they had ever caught me.
This happened a few years ago. So my grandpa, my dad's dad, who we call Pa, had cancer 4 different times. He was really sick, but you wouldn't really know it. My brothers and I were never really that close with him, or at least compared to my other grandparents. My dad's parents weren't bad people, of course, they just weren't very warm, but we always knew they loved us. So unfortunately, Pa passed away. He had gotten out of the hospital and seemed to be doing fine, but as I've learned, that's usually because life is nearing its end. He and my grandma, who we call Ma, had just moved out of my dad and my aunt's childhood home and into a little condo closer to where we live. It was just about a week, either before or after, I can't really remember, his 79th birthday. I remember when my mom told me, I was standing in the living room. It was homecoming night, not the dance, it was just bonfire and fireworks. And I was contemplating whether I wanted to go out or not. I can't remember how the conversation came up, but eventually my mom had to tell my oldest brother and I. My brother went downstairs to call my dad. My parents are divorced, and I remember just standing in the living room and crying. I hate to say it, but I had known it was going to happen soon, but it never really hits you until it happens. Even then, you can't wrap your head around the thought that somebody you had loved, hugged, laughed with, ate with, was really, truly actually gone. Eventually, the time came when the whole family gathered for his funeral and wake. After maybe a couple of days, I had this dream. This dream was crazy vivid, but also extremely strange, so hopefully you'll be able to follow. In the dream, I was a tennis player. I'm not sure why, because I'm not an athlete of any sort, especially not tennis. But anyway, there was a trampoline. I know, it's weird, but follow me. The trampoline was a tennis court. There were people in the audience. They were cheering for me, and it was great, but I couldn't really see them. They were like those black figures or colorful figures that dance on the bleachers in some of the Wii games, you know? I eventually actually won the match, and I had gone into what seemed to be my grandparents' house, the old one, where my dad and aunt lived. I was upset that my grandfather wasn't there to see me win such an important match. I had been in the kitchen, and when I looked out the window, I saw my grandfather, but it wasn't Pa. It was Pawpaw, my mom's dad, who is very much alive. He was sitting on the bleachers. Everyone else was gone except for him. All of a sudden, he looked at me and stood up, and I noticed he was wearing Pa's sunglasses, the sunglasses he wore the last time I'd seen him alive. And then I realized that it was Pa. When he stood up, he smiled. It makes me choke up thinking about it. He started to wave at me. I wasn't scared. All I could think about was that he had seen me win the match, and even in my dream, I could figure out that he wasn't waving at me to say hello. He was waving to say goodbye. Sometimes I wonder if that's just my brain repeating the last time I'd seen him. Ma and Pa had been camping with their RV, and my mom and brothers and I were going to the area to go to a water park. And my mom decided to stop so we could say hello, and I'm really glad that we did. When we were there, he was struggling, but I hadn't honestly noticed. He was laughing and making the jokes that he always did. And when we left, he and Ma stood together and waved goodbye. Though I think it's very possible that my brain made it up so that I could cope or something with the loss of my grandfather, I like to think that he was really saying goodbye for the last time. Telling me that though he was leaving the physical world, he'd still be there for us in another world, cheering us on.
I was living in a rural area in Oklahoma with my mother at a small lake house, and I'm probably 10 to 11 at this time. One night, I'm sleeping in my room when I randomly and abruptly wake up for no reason. This was not normal for me, and I felt very uneasy. The only sound I could hear was my mother snoring in the next room on the couch. I rolled over and tried to go back to sleep, but my need to use the bathroom was growing more urgent, so I grudgingly forced myself to head that way. The bathroom is on the other side of the house, around a corner and past the kitchen, and finally down a long hallway on the right. So after I made the trip and finished my business, I flipped off the light switch and started heading back to bed. That's when I heard the distinct click of the light switch, and I saw the glow of the bathroom light in the hallway. Terrified, I slowly turned around just to witness the light in the bathroom start clicking on and off. Finally, it shut off completely. In the dark of the hallway, my eyes began to make out a white shape near the end of the hall. It was around my size and crouched to the floor. At this point, I'm frozen to the spot as my mind begins realizing that no one else is home except my mum and myself. Then the white shape began whispering in a quiet man's voice.
"Help me, I'm lost."
I remember wanting to scream for my mum, but I couldn't, and instead I barely said, "No," before this thing starts running at me on what sounded like all fours. I quickly ran through the kitchen and around the corner before running to my sleeping mother, shaking her awake. I remember saying, "It's coming, it's coming," and my mother's eyes going from dazed to alert in an instant. She asked me what was going on, and I saw her eyes look over my shoulder before she screamed. Remembering her scream still makes my blood run cold. Never had I heard pure terror like that in my life, even to this day. She grabs me by the arms and pulls me into my room and slams the door. She holds me in her arms with her back pressed against the door as we listen. It sounded like this thing was running around in circles in the kitchen. We could hear hands and feet slapping against the tile. The kitchen had a sliding glass door to the outside, which sounded like it was thrown open, then slammed. We sat there horrified until daybreak. I was sent to my grandmother's in the next town for a while after that, and I never set foot in that house again. Years later, my mother said she went walking around the property after the incident and came across a small burial site with 3 headstones that each belonged to children from the early 1900s. It freaks me out because what I heard that night was a man's voice, but it was so unnatural. My mum still will not tell me what she saw behind me and what it was that made her scream. She tells me she's afraid it will know we're talking about it and it will come back. This is the first of many weird things that have happened in my life.
Well, I hope you enjoyed those spooky tales tonight, kiddies. Oh, who could that be? Hold on. Yes?
Hello, ma'am. I was wondering if you would like to buy one of these Girl Scout cookies.
Possibly. Although I'm watching my figure. What's in them?
Flour, butter, milk, and chocolate chips?
No cyanide?
I don't think so.
What about bat's blood? Do they contain that?
No.
Human remains?
No.
Ugh, then no thanks. Those cookies sound dull as dishwater. Ugh. Now, keep sending in your stories, darlings, on my website at www.deadlydebbie.com. Until next week, don't eat too many cookies.